This is the key to Topic 5, Part A worksheet. And on this worksheet, you want to solve each of these quadratic equations by factoring. So it's very important that you follow directions. The directions did say do this by factoring. Also make sure that you do show your work. Okay, so let's look at number 1. So number 1, we have 2x squared minus 7x plus 6 equals 0. And so, first of all, we have to make sure it's in standard form, and this is in standard form. You have all the terms to one side, zeros on the other side, so that makes this in standard form. And so we're going to solve this by factoring. The GCF of each of those three terms is 1, and so we're going to go directly to the two binomials. And don't forget, you must say equals 0. You must say equals 0. Okay, and so to factor this, you just have to remember your factoring techniques from last semester. And so notice that the last term's positive, so that means that these signs in here are going to be the same, and they're going to be this middle sign. So they're both going to be negative. And so for 2x squared, the only possibility for 2x squared is 2x and x, because 2x times x is 2x squared. And for 6, there are several possibilities. There's 3 and 2, because 3 times 2 is 6. And then there's 6 and 1. So let's try 3 and 2. Now let's go ahead and put the 3 here and the 2 there. And remember, the last sign is positive, so that means that these signs have to be the same, because a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a positive. But we know from last semester that these two signs here have to both be negative. And then before you go on, remember, one of the techniques you learned last semester was to always check your work. So the outer is a negative 4x, the inner is a negative 3x, and when I add a negative 4x and a negative 3x, I get a negative 7x. So I factored this correctly. Now the next thing you're going to use is what's called the zero factor property. So I'm going to use the word zero factor property. So in the lessons you learned about the zero factor property. And so basically the zero factor property indicates that if you have two or more factors whose product is 0, so two or more factors whose product is 0, then one of those factors has to be 0. So either A is 0 or B is 0. And that's what's happening here. So I have two factors whose product is 0. So according to the zero factor property, one of those factors has to be 0. So we're going to set each of those equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 equals 0. And then x minus 2 equals 0. And the next step is to solve each of these linear equations. Now I want you to notice that I went from a quadratic equation to two linear equations. And so then I get to solve this linear equation, you're going to bring all the constants to one side, and then you can divide by the coefficient of x. So I get 2x equal 3. And then when divide both sides by 2, I get x to be 3 halves. So that's one of your solutions. And over here, this one is easy because all you're going to do is add 2 to both sides, right? And so when you combine like terms at 0, so you get x to be 2. So those are your two solutions for this first quadratic equation. In the second quadratic equation, I want you to notice that the equation is not in standard form. So remember, I'm using the word standard form. So go back in your lessons and review that word. So standard form indicates a quadratic equation is in standard form if it has this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equal 0. So this one was in standard form because you had all the terms to one side, 0 on the other. This one's not. So to bring this 12 over, I'm going to have to subtract 12. So in standard form, this becomes 6x squared plus x minus 12 equal 0. And so now I have it in standard form. Okay, so now we're going to factor this trinomial. And so the GCF of each of those terms is 1. And so now we're going to go directly to the two binomials. And so for 6x squared, there are two possibilities for 6x squared. There's 6x and 1x, or there's 3x and 2x. Let's try 3x and 2x. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. Now this one, the last sign's negative, so that means these signs in here have to be different, okay? All right, now let's look at 12. There are several possibilities for 12. 4 times 3 is 12, 2 times 6 is 12, 1 times 12 is 12. So let's go ahead and try 3 and 4 first. So let's put the 4 here, the 3 there. And remember, last semester, this was trial and error. So if that didn't work, you tried something else. All right. So make sure you're practicing with your factoring techniques with these. Okay, so let's look at the last sign. The last sign is negative, so one of these has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. Now remember, you want the middle term here is positive, so that means that the larger of the outer and the inner will be this middle sign. So if you look at the outer, that is a 9x. If you look at the inner, that is an 8x. Okay, so that means that 9x, that product 9x, has to be positive. So that means this 3 has to be positive, and this 4 has to be negative. Now let's check it. Let's check by using FOIL. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. A negative 4 times 3 is a negative 12. Now let's do the middle term. The middle, you look at the outer and the inner. 9x and a negative 8x is a positive x, and that's what you wanted. All right, so I factored this completely. So now I'm going to use a zero factor property. So one of these factors has to be 0. So we're going to set each one equal to 0, just like this. And then you set then you solve for x. So notice I went from a quadratic equation to 2 linear equations. So to solve this linear equation, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I get 3x equals 4. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3, just like this. And so I get x to be 4/3. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And when I combine like terms, that's 0 here. So I get 2x equal negative 3. Divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 times x is x. So I get x to be a negative 3/2. All right, and so that is solving quadratic equations by factoring. Now last semester, remember one of the questions in your final exam had to do with solving quadratic equations by factoring. So this is basically a review from the course from last semester. Okay, so that's going to take care of the key for topic 5, part